Welcome back to the show, everybody. You are watching and or listening to the Belly Up Fantasy Live Football Show. Beside me is Chris Dowhower, and I, of course, am your host, Adam L'Heureux. Dan is away on a much-deserved vacation. Dan, I hope you're enjoying it if for some reason you are listening in. How you doing, Dan? Or Chris?
I'm doing pretty good. Sweating my butt off out here. I mean, it's been like 95 degrees the last couple of days, so hopefully, trying to get adjusted to the summer weather, I guess.
Yeah, it has been very hot. I went to get groceries today, and it was uncomfortable to be outside.
Yes, it is.
So today we're going to be talking about our top 10 most overvalued players, some of the guys who we think are going, too high, and there's guys below them that we think are better values, whether at the same position or just kind of in general. But before that, just a special shout out to Manscaped. Summer's coming. Are you ready to unveil your beach bod? You're in luck. Our friends at Manscaped just launched their 4th generation performance package, which includes the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, 4.0. Complement your dad bod or six-pack with a trim from the leaders in male grooming. The sun is shining and calling your name, fellas. Join the 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and get ready for hot guy summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off free shipping with the code BELLYUPFANTASY. So first, we can start with Cam Akers, who we both had on our lists. So Chris, why are you so against the grain here with Cam Akers, who has been getting, I know you're not a big social media guy. He's been getting a ton of hype on fantasy football Twitter this season.
So, yeah, I mean, I love Cam Akers as a prospect. I think he's got a lot of talent. I like the fit with the Rams. But I have some questions about his high ranking, particularly basically the borderline first round, early second round. I see a lot of rankings with him right now. And for me, I look at the statistics. It doesn't really match up. He had 2 touchdowns last year. That's not very many for a guy who's supposed to be in the top 10 running back position. He had 2 wonderful games. One of those games was against New England. He had almost, over 170 yards. He also had about 28 carries. And when you look at the touches, from game to game, he really got 20-something carries. He doesn't really catch the ball out of the backfield. So I don't necessarily see this dramatic jump. I think Cam Akers is going to be very productive. I think he's going to be, borderline RB1, RB2. But I don't think he's a top, prospect on my board. I think that when you look overall, like I said, between the statistics of touchdowns he had last year and being involved in the passing game, I don't think this team's going to become a run-oriented team in any kind of stretch of the means. I think they traded for Matthew Stafford and gave a lot of draft capital to get him. So I expect him to continue to throw the ball a lot. And I don't think Cam Akers is necessarily going to be, this big breakout guy everybody wants him to be necessarily.
Yeah, I think as a football player, he's going to have a great season. But to your point, I think for fantasy, guys like Mixon, Najee Harris, if Antonio Gibson can improve as a pass blocker, I think he would be a much better option, and even potentially Josh Jacobs, because I have a lot more confidence that he's going to get those touchdowns than I am of Akers. Akers is, like you said, really talented back, really talented prospect, good situation. But between Stafford coming in, making the team more pass-oriented, between Henderson and him just not being a receiving back and not being someone you want to use the goal line, just being someone who you're using, between the, each 20, he's just not someone that for fantasy is he's going to be great. He's going to be, like you said, high end RB2 to low end RB1, but just not, where he's getting picked at right now.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about that Rams offensive line in general as well. I mean, they didn't do much to improve it. And I mean, a lot of people I think are hyping him like he's going to be Todd Gurley, and I think that they're 2 different players.
Right. For sure. All right, so we'll move on to my second guy, and the first guy we differ on. I want to talk about Adam Thielen. Last year, he was very, very, very touchdown reliant. He had 14 touchdowns. It was the only time in his career that he went double digits. And if you, drop that to the 7 or so that he had been averaging throughout the rest of his career, we're talking a wide receiver 4 based on if he had the same receiving stats, same targets, same yards per reception. It's everything for a full 16, 17 games next year. But then he drops back down in touchdowns. He's getting taken a lot higher than I would, knowing that risk that Justin Jefferson is, to me, only going to continue to improve. He's only going to continue to demand a higher share in that offense. I'm not buying into Kirk Cousins' second target if that second target isn't also a wide receiver one, which Adam Thielen has been for a long time. But, after his injury 2 seasons ago, and then, last season, still a very, very good player, still a very, very productive player. But a lot of his fantasy value was coming from touchdowns, and that's just not something that I want to bank on happening again, because touchdowns are unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, the 14 touchdowns, I don't think is necessarily a number he's going to reach again. I do question, though, whether he'll be more productive in the passing game yardage-wise, just because I do think hopefully he'll be more healthy. To your point, he's been banged up the last 2 years. Last year, he had missed some time. Was definitely not himself in some senses. But I do think that when you talk about a receiver one, Adam Thielen is not a receiver one anymore, unfortunately.
Right. All right. So on to Kareem Hunt, who, is the premier second string running back in the NFL and in fantasy. So why do you think he's being overhyped? Why is he getting taken too high?
So I look at a lot of the running backs that are kind of going after Kareem Hunt, and I think they're actually starters, number one. And I kind of look at the numbers. Kareem Hunt was very productive overall statistically, but he had his biggest spurts came when Nick Chubb was injured, especially carrying the ball. He's always kind of involved in the passing game. So PPR purposes, I can see that you might still have Kareem Hunt. But I think overall, when you look at the production, he's not necessarily going to be heavily involved in the running game. He's not going to be heavily involved in the red zone. And I think that you got a lot of production, like I said, with Nick Chubb kind of being banged up last year and Kareem Hunt kind of capitalizing on that. I do think those numbers are going to drop in a lot of different ways. I'm still not understanding why Nick Chubb can't be involved in the passing game. I don't know if that's ever going to change, but I do think that overall Kareem Hunt's being a little too valued for me, where he's kind of basically, borderline going with a lot of starting running backs, RB2. I think statistically he finished that way last year, but I think overall this year you can't expect the same kind of production.
Right. He's definitely getting a boost from the spurts when Chubb was out last year. And to your point, guys who are definite starters, not the same level of talent as Hunt, but definite starters nonetheless in Myles Gaskin, Mostert, Chase Edmonds, Fournette, Etienne, Mike Davis. These guys are all going behind Hunt. And then, your choice of Denver running back and some of these other muddier situations. But he's just in a situation that's really holding him back in fantasy terms. On the field, he's in a fantastic situation. He's an impactful player on the Browns offense. They're a run-heavy offense, and they like to throw to him. He helps the team more as a football player than he does fantasy teams as a fantasy player. He's just not someone that brings as much fantasy value as he does real-world NFL value. So I would definitely have to agree with you there. Him being taken as an RB2 just seems a lot like a risk to me. As a high-end flex, I would 100% get it, but not as your RB2.
I was going to say, I think he benefited from OBJ being out most of last year too, so that helped him in the passing game, quite a bit. I think Cleveland to kind of throw the ball a bit more than they had last year, or last 2 years, I should say, because I think with OBJ healthy and Mayfield more comfortable, I think they're going to open up a little bit. I think they're becoming a throw first team necessarily, but I think they throw the ball a bit more and not necessarily to the running backs like they were last year.
Absolutely. All right, on to one of the other big names that you and I agreed on, and then we'll start to differ a lot more here on out. Chris Godwin was one that we both thought was overvalued. I know why I think he's overvalued. What do you have to say on the subject?
I mean, for me, Chris Godwin's a hell of a player, and I think he's really talented. But I looked at the numbers last year, and I can't see where people are expecting him to jump for him to be a receiver one, where he's basically going right now. He scored, I think, 6 or 7 touchdowns last year. He, close to 1,000 yards, but he wasn't super consistent. And one of the things I noticed towards the end of the season was Tom Brady started getting on the same page more with Mike Evans, besides just being in the red zone all the time. And Antonio Brown became kind of his security blanket in a lot of ways. So with both those players returning and becoming more, comfortable with Tom Brady, I think Godwin's not going to be the guy who's necessarily going to be eating week in, week out. That's especially for a guy you're basically drafting, where you're talking about Adam Thielen. This guy's basically going around receiver one value right now. and I can't go there. I mean, I think he's really very talented, but I said the statistics last year don't add up to that, and I don't see the numbers improving much this year.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Antonio Brown was going like 30 receivers later, and I honestly think he'll be targeted more. Like, I don't know if we'll get maybe the same amount of touchdowns or maybe the exact same amount of fantasy points, but I mean, in terms of targets, in terms of who Brady's going to look to throw to first, I genuinely think that Golladay will be the third option. Or Godwin, sorry. Godwin will be the third option. And, it's a loaded receiving core. It's a loaded offense in general. Someone who's incredibly talented has to be the odd man out. And in this case, I think it's going to be Godwin, because Antonio Brown is going to eat in PPR. He's going to get a ton of targets. And Evans is going to be that red zone guy. To your point, he was getting, targets throughout the rest of the field a lot more often last season. And, they've got a bunch of tight ends. They've got, 2, 3, 4 running backs that are, going to need at least some work. They didn't draft Keyshawn Vaughn for nothing. Rojo's going to get some touches. Fournette's going to get some touches. Giovanni Bernard was brought on as a receiving back. That is the only role that they wanted him for. So, I mean, there's just the ball. Someone's going to get left out. I think it's Godwin. And it looks like we are on the same page there. So when I was reading through your list, I think the one that stuck out to me the most, and I actually did end up tacking it on at the end of mine, but I think you're going to have a much stronger thought on this subject than I do. But Justin Herbert being your number 4 most overvalued. When I looked at it at first, I was like, I don't know about that. But then I took a look at the ADP and actually seeing guys like Brady and Rodgers, and I believe Russ as well behind him. I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think two guys right off the bat, Russell Wilson and Tom Brady, are going, with 2-3 rounds after Justin Herbert. I think that Herbert's numbers will be solid this year, and I think he's still being a quarterback one. But I think a lot of times when you look at what he did last year, expect him to have the same seasons. To me, is kind of high expectations in the sense that their offense was familiar to him. And Anthony Lynn was the coach, different coaching staff, different scheme. Talking about being more pass oriented and kind of building the offense around him, but this remains to be seen. I think that the Chargers were horrible running the ball last year. I think that can improve in a lot of ways, which might take away some of his numbers. And then overall, I think that they didn't do much to upgrade his, receiving core. I think losing Hunter Henry is going to hurt in the red zone. And I think that when you look at the team in general, he had a lot of big play touchdowns last year. And I kind of, talked about Adam Thielen's regression because of the 14 touchdowns. I think Justin Herbert had over 6, 20 or 50-yard or more touchdown passes last year. I expect that regression to, definitely occur. And I expect that there's going to be some adjustments to his scheme. You saw that kind of as the season progressed, teams started focusing on taking Keenan Allen away in a lot of ways. That seems to be his security blanket. Once you took that first read and Keenan Allen away, he wasn't as nearly as effective. So I do think there's going to be another year of tape on Justin Herbert. And overall, like I said, there's a lot of other guys who I think are going lower than he is. Will have higher value. And I think there's not a guy I'm reaching on in the 5th or 6th round right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's someone who is a dynasty guy. I think he's one of the best assets that you can have. For stability, he's someone that, you're hoping, barring like injury or some crazy regression, can be a cornerstone of your franchise for a decade. And dynasty. In redraft, that's just not how this works. In redraft, someone like Aaron or Brady or Russ, who, right now is, going to go put up some big numbers. And I think numbers that I have a little bit more faith in than Herbert putting up this year. To your point, he is due for a touchdown regression. He had some flaws coming out, and they started to present themselves not near to the extent that I ever thought that they would, but they started to ease their way back in a little bit towards the end. He did slow down a lot. He came out during that Chiefs game and played fantastic and kind of rode that high for a while. But like you said, once they took Keenan Allen away and in that first read, then there just wasn't a lot left for him. And I don't trust much of the receivers around him outside of Keenan Allen to be, the guys that are going to consistently be open for him. He's got a ton of deep threats, and then Keenan Allen, but then not like a lot that fills other roles, which to me is a concern.
Yeah, and I think also Keenan Allen was healthy most of last year, which isn't consistently been the case, the past few years.
Yeah, that's also 100% too. 100% true. Similar to what we all had to say about Godwin, I had a lot of similar thoughts when I looked at Chase Claypool. He's someone that I think is getting overhyped. I think for him, it's specifically because of his physical ability, because he's a fast 6'4" wide receiver on an offense that threw at a high volume last year. But to me, just like Godwin, I think he's at best, he will be the second option. And I can very easily see a way in which he is the third, and he's being drafted like relatively high for someone who was under 1,000 yards receiving and coming into his second year. I don't know. I love the player. I'm a Notre Dame fan. That at this point, having been on this show, but a guy who is either going to be a low end wide, like he's getting drafted as a high end wide receiver 3. And that's about where I see him on his own team, is it as a good wide receiver 3. There were points late in the season last year where Ben was specifically requesting for James Washington to get in more. And if that's not a problem to you as someone that's going after Claypool, then I just don't understand. I don't know. Am I crazy here?
No, I mean, I like Claypool's talent, and I think he's a phenomenal guy. Talking about dynasty leagues earlier, I think that's something he definitely a guy you want to key on. But to your point, I looked at he's basically going 2 or 3 picks after Deontay Johnson. He's basically ranked almost head and head with Deontay Johnson. I think Deontay Johnson's definitely number 1 receiver. I don't think it's really close. I think it's debatable who the number 2 receiver is in a lot of ways. Will it be Juju? Will he have that bounce back? Will it be Claypool? Will it be James Washington? Will it be one of the tight ends? They drafted a tight end this year as well. So they're bringing different weapons in. They brought in Najee Harris, which is going to be a huge addition to that offense in the passing game, I think, as well. Connor wasn't really heavily involved in the passing game. And when Benny Snell took over, he wasn't involved in the passing game at all. So I think that when you look at what Najee brings to the table, not only will they look to run the ball a bit more, they'll look to run the ball to him a little bit more too. So I think Claypool's numbers could suffer. But I also think that he's the guy that you kind of keep your eye on just because he has a lot of DK Metcalf ability where you talked about, physicality wise. Sometimes those guys just, could beast out and get you touchdowns. But I do think the volume and the consistency is going to be something you're kind of worried about. And I think there's other guys like Brandon Cooks and people like that are going way below he is, 2-3 rounds after him. And I think that's a little too rich for my blood as well. So I can understand that ranking that you're talking about.
Yeah, and to your point on Najee Harris, which I forgot to even bring up, he only, once again, Claypool only had like 850-ish yards last season. He was a fantasy asset because of his touchdowns. He had the 1 3-touchdown game and then had a handful later in the season. If Najee Harris starts coming in and being the goal line guy that I think he's very well capable of being, then, that's going to take away a lot of Claypool's value. Then he's really only, he'll probably still get a couple goal line catches and he's fast enough and, has all of the makings to be a great deep threat. Then I'm not worried that he won't get any, but we could see him capped out at like 6 or 7. And for someone who I'm not convinced will be 1,000-yard receiver this season, 7's not cutting it for where he's getting drafted. So that's my spiel on Claypool. You've got a little string of rookies going, and we'll start it with Etienne, another young player like Claypool, like Herbert, this time in his first year.
Yeah, I Travis Etienne's in a weird situation, I think, going this year. Right now, he's basically ADP between the 6th and 7th round, so people looking at their RB3. I think that maybe he's a flex option at some point in this season. Maybe as the season progresses, maybe you'll see me have running back 3 value. But in the beginning of the season, James Robinson is not going anywhere. They brought in Carlos Hyde, and one of the things I like to point out is the coaching staff in general. You have Urban Meyer there. You brought in Darren Bevel, and you have Schottenheimer as well in there. all these guys have traditionally liked to have their hammer backs, where they like to have some guy who's kind of a bigger guy and kind of smashes up the middle between between the tackles. So I think James Robinson kind of profiles as that guy. So does Carlos Hyde. I think there's a lot of talk about Travis Etienne being kind of a weapon and playing the Percy Harvin role. I think that's the worst thing that you can kind of target, especially as a rookie, as a Percy Harvin role. We heard the same thing about Chenault last year, and he didn't do anything productive wise in Jacksonville. So I think that maybe when you look at the Etienne, you might have a guy that you want to draft later in the draft as a guy you want to have kind of stashed on your bench as for the playoff run. But I think in the beginning of the season, you're going to see this team basically try to take the pressure off of Trevor Lawrence. They're going to try to establish the run. They're going to try to be physical. I think this guy, if he's going to be pretty much a third or fourth mouth they feed on the offense, how can you justify him being your RB3?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think is really interesting about a couple of these backs, because Javonte Williams is the same way. It's like, how do you value this guy who I think could be a really valuable asset to have down the stretch when you start getting into those fantasy playoffs, when you start, getting into those win and you're in games, these really important games down the stretch. But first half of the season, I'm expecting you to maybe be a flex option. Javonte Williams is a little different because I think he can get on the field in a lot more different ways. But it's just that problem of when are you getting in, and if it's in the second half of the season, at what ratio are we talking? Because I'm willing to take that risk potentially if we're talking a 70-30 split between Etienne and James Robinson. But if it's closer to 60-40 or 50-50, then that doesn't help me going down the stretch. So you're taking a massive risk on him and Williams and a couple of these other backs who we're hoping can late in the season supplant their veteran starters. And I just don't think it's worth it. There's safer options available. There's more, there's options that you can trust available at the same ADP who can get you similar upside, but not nearly the downside that, some of these young big names boast.
Well, yeah, I think even the Javonte Williams, talking about him, he's the guy I'd rather target over Etienne. And he's going about 2 rounds later than Etienne's projected to go right now. So that's where I kind of look at this guy and say, really, how high are you valued? And you're definitely overhyped. Like I said, I'd rather have Javonte Williams. You made a great point. He can, I think, be more involved in a lot of different ways and has more of a clear access to getting on the field and production-wise. Where Etienne, if it's going to be this gadget role, I don't know where you can necessarily guess that's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And I also think that when you look at the guys below him, like Damian Harris, people like that, there's guys going, 2-3 rounds right now, ADP lower than he is, who I definitely know are going to be starting the season and be your bell cows for some of these teams.
Right. Like Mike Davis, for example, as you said, Williams is going below him. I believe you can have your pick of Edmonds or Connor in a lot of cases. Michael Carter's available. There's a lot of guys, either of the Buffalo backs, a lot of guys are available that you can go get, that what you are getting, rather than Etienne, which is this massive mystery. He might be someone that, like I said in the beginning, he helps you win your league because he comes in and becomes the bell cow down the stretch, but he might not, and I'm not going to be the one that takes that risk.
Agreed.
All right. Before we get into too much else, let's go ahead and get on to that, the ad read for the Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation Best Ball League that we are doing in conjunction with them.
Yeah. So do you think you're the best at best ball? Well, take on some of the top analysts in the industry while also playing for charity when you sign up for the Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation, a belly-up charity bowl tournament. This mega tournament will have over 204 teams with 17 different leagues. Each of these leagues will be named for a childhood cancer hero, and over $2,000 donation will be made to the Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation to help fight against childhood cancer. All you have to do is sign up and pay a $20 entry fee, which will also allow you to play for some big money. Our first place is $1,200 plus $100 worth of value from Trophy Snack. Second place is $400. And if you win your league, you win your money back. So for $20, you get your $20 back. Sign up today when you go to the bellyupfantasysports.com/bellyyup-bowl, or just click the link to join a fun competition for a great cause.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great cause. I highly encourage anyone who's listening to join in. I will be involved. I know Dan will. it's going to be a great time. All right, on to my fifth player, who I'm sticking at the receiver position for the fourth straight person on my list. I'm moving it over to Kenny Golladay. And this is another guy who, I think I've probably also said this about the last four guys, I really like the talent. I think Golladay is a great player. I don't trust Daniel Jones at all, especially in regards to him. Daniel Jones to me is not someone who I think is going to give him the ball a lot in those contested situations, and that's what Golladay needs. I don't know. I don't trust Daniel Jones to get him the volume down the field that Golladay needs, and it's just I don't think Jason Garrett is going to be creative in getting Golladay the ball in ways where they can figure something out interesting on the offense. Just all in all, the Giants offense is one that I'm hesitant to get into. Barkley at the right price, obviously, and a couple of the other guys, sure. But Golladay for where he's getting drafted, it's just not for me. I don't think. I'm trying to pull back up where exactly his ADP is. Because he's going. He's going above guys like Deontay Johnson, above T. Higgins, Odell, Jamar Chase, Cortland Sutton, Brandon Cooks. And again, I just think those options are safer. He could do great with Daniel Jones, but I'm not betting on it personally.
So I have a little different take on this one, just because I look at Kenny Galladay's most successful season, and that was with about a bunch of Detroit backup quarterbacks for that basically the entire season. So when it comes to the quarterback play, I think Daniel Jones is definitely better than some of the backup Detroit threw out 2 years ago. And then I also look at what Jason Garrett. While I understand that there's definitely questions about his creativity, he was able to use Des Bryant pretty effectively, who's a lot of similar ways I think Kenny Golladay is. I think Kenny Golladay is going to be the true number one receiver on this team. I think he'll be featured accordingly, just like Dez was. Now, the rest of the guys, I 100% agree, where I wonder where the value and kind of where they fall into place, because we saw people like Cole Beasley, we saw Austin, we've seen different players kind of go in and out of Terrence Williams, going in and out of Dallas. Basically, that second receiver is basically wasted a lot of times. And then, there's some use to the tight end, Jace Witten, out there catching 4-yard passes forever. But I do think that when it comes to them using their number one receiver and kind of featuring him, Jason Garrett has kind of a history of doing so. So I kind of trust that part. And I do trust that Daniel Jones, he talked about, being aggressive. Might be the most aggressive quarterback. He does throw some jump balls, though. He's willing to throw the ball up a little bit more than most guys are. So that's kind of why I kind of, believe in that. But I understand the questions, because I know Dan and I had an argument off air about this, about where we kind of see Kenny Galladay's value. And he had a similar point of view that you have, where it's just basically, where's he going to eat on the food chain, and will Daniel Jones actually give him the ball?
Yeah. What I was going to say was that he's absolutely better than those Lions quarterbacks. You're 100% right there. But I almost think a lot of times, especially these young backups, you think, and even older guys, Fitzpatrick fits this really well, but they'll come on the field, they'll be super aggressive because what do you have to lose? But Daniel Jones has a lot to lose. And I don't, you're right. He's not, uber conservative like Alex Smith. Like, we're not talking about that, but he's just not someone who I'm going to trust, someone who I don't think is going to be obviously open all of the time. He's someone that the quarterback's going to have to make open a lot. I don't trust Daniel Jones to do that. All right.
Understandable.
Going back to your list, and this is one I find really interesting because he is someone that's getting a ton of hype, and for good reason. He stands to get an insane target share at the tight end position. TJ Hawkinson of the Detroit Lions.
Yeah. So once again, I go back to the numbers from last year. I think that there's a drop off in the quarterback from Matthew Stafford to going to Jared Goff. I think that you look at the weapons you kind of talked about. Kenny Golladay was hurt most of last year, so he wasn't very productive. Marvin Jones was kind of in and out most of the season. So T.J. Hawkinson had a chance to kind of shine last year and really didn't put up fantastic numbers as a result of it. He was primarily, number one weapon for a good good amount of weeks last year in a lot of ways. I think he's definitely the number one weapon on Detroit this year, but I question how much they're going to score. I wonder how productive their offense is going to be in general. And I also think that this guy has been here in the league about 3 years now, and he hasn't had that breakout year everybody's kind of waiting for. I think that people are kind of looking at their, through attrition, that the receiving core is so poor that he has to be the guy. But like I said, you look at the numbers last year, look at some of the guys they were throwing out there last year. He was probably the number 2, number 1 receiver in a lot of threat a lot of weeks last year, and he still wasn't producing in the high level. So I look at the guy, I think he's a solid tight end. I just don't necessarily believe the hype, because I think that a lot of people are just kind of assuming he's going to have this dramatic jump, and I don't necessarily see it.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right on a lot of that. I guess I'd push back a little bit. I think that, with their head coach having been a tight ends coach, and with how I think this offense is likely going to be between him and Anthony Lynn and just everyone involved, it's almost guaranteed to be a run heavy. Like, we're going to run 2 tight end, 2 wide receiver sets, or I form, or like, I think they're going to be an offense that runs sets where tight ends will be heavily involved a lot. And with that, I think his opportunities to be involved in the passing game a little bit more will be there. But to your point, how much more? And if the drop off in quarterback is negated by him getting a couple more opportunities is there, I think you're right. I don't see a massive jump. I think you might see his targets go up, but I don't necessarily know if they'll be as valuable of targets as, what you have with Stafford, and as what you have with, for the couple games that Golladay was there, when there's other receiving options. Because at the end of the day, when you're one receiving option and you're not even like he's a super technically great player, but he's not this matchup nightmare that some of these other freak fantasy, output guys at the tight end position are. He's someone that can be covered by a linebacker because he's not an outrageous athlete. Overall, I think he is a really good player. I just, for fantasy purposes, I think we're only really talking about him in this way because of the complete lack of weapons on the rest of the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about Dan Campbell. Maybe that will kind of change it and make him more involved. But I also look at Anthony Lynn's usage of tight ends. Hunter Henry basically left you kind of scratching your head from week to week when he was out there healthy and wasn't really necessarily heavily involved in the passing game or targeted a lot. So, I mean, I think that Hockenstein's red zone opportunities will be there, but I kind of question the numbers production-wise overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will be – I'm going to go on to my last receiver. I was thinking about switching with so we can go back-to-back tight ends, but we'll go with my last receiver. We're going to talk about Henry Ruggs. Henry Ruggs is not going very high, but honestly, just given some of the flyer wide receivers that you can have after him, it just irks me that he's being drafted as a wide receiver 5. So, like, whatever. Like, this is someone he's at the top of your bench. You're taking a flyer on him potentially being good, but I just don't see it with the offensive line getting worse and him still not being a productive deep threat last year, with him now, 1, not being the best deep threat on his team, 2, having a worse offensive line. So they're probably, if they try to throw deep as often as they did last year, I don't think it'll go well. And if they don't, then Ruggs is essentially useless. And then some of the guys going after him are guys like Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, Jamison Crowder, his own teammate John Brown, who I'm not convinced that he beats out. Even Nelson Aguilar, I think, could be a little bit more productive. Sterling Shepard. We talk about Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown almost feels a little bit safer in terms of that he's going to get the targets required. I feel more confident in him getting those targets than I do Ruggs. Granted, Ruggs has a much higher ceiling, but that's besides the point. I think his floor is at rock bottom, and I'm not sure how much higher than that his actual performance will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make an excellent point. He reminds me a lot of Ross from Cincinnati. Ross is on the Giants now, but the kind of that one-trick pony that, you have a lot of hype because of the speed. First of all, can we just relax the whole comp to Tyreek Hill, because he was never Tyreek Hill. He never will be Tyreek Hill. Number 2, I think that when you look at the production and the jumps, last year Nelson Aguilar was their deep threat. So that kind of should tell you something, that Nelson Aguilar, who wasn't really known for being a deep threat, was their prime number one deep threat. And basically all Ruggs did was be a decoy. Now they said they're going to use him a lot more in the passing game, and we hear John Gruden talk about, how we're going to involve him more. John Gruden says a lot of stuff in the offseason doesn't happen during the regular season. One thing we know traditionally, he plays those veteran receivers more times than not. You made a point about John Brown. I think John Brown's going to be on the field because he's a veteran receiver. You look on the other side, you have Edwards coming back. Edwards was pretty productive until he got hurt last year. I think he has more of the red zone targets and more usage. And then you have guys like, Renfro and different slot receivers they have on that team. They brought in Kenny Drake to throw the ball to somewhat. So I think that when you look at the mouths to feed, particularly closer to the line of scrimmage, and I agree with you, the offensive line is going to be butt this year again. Derek Carr doesn't necessarily like to push the ball down the field as it is. So he's going to have guys that he can kind of hit the ball and get quickly to get rid of the ball quickly to. I think he's going to utilize those guys. I think Ruggs might have a big weaker here or there. He'll kind of be that, that wins you one gamer here maybe. But overall, as not a guy I'm targeting, and especially as my fourth or fifth receiver, because like you said, there's a lot better options with better upside, I think, as the season progresses. And this guy, what does he do other than be fast? He's not going to be effective in the red zone. He doesn't run great patterns. So you're just basically looking for that big play. And if you don't get that big play, basically you get nothing.
Yeah. He just doesn't have the lateral, like, sideline, like, agility that Tyreek does. I will never understand that comp. He is a straight line track speed guy. He is not someone that I don't know. I don't see that. And to your point with Edwards, I honestly, if I'm taking a receiver from that draft class from the Raiders last year, I would honestly consider taking Edwards first. I'm not that concerned with the draft capital. I've seen what I need to see from Ruggs, and I'm just not interested. Moving on from Ruggs, we get to go with another wide receiver. This time on your side, Deebo Samuel. What do you have to say?
Yeah, so I talked about Kareem Hunt kind of, making his heyday when Nick Chubb was out. This guy, Deebo Samuel, basically made his heyday when Ayuk wasn't the number one starter. And once Ayuk kind of took over that, I think he was the guy, the primary beneficiary, and the rest of the season progressed on and was a true number one receiver in a lot of ways. You didn't have George Kittle for most of the season, or a healthy George Kittle for most of the season. He's going to return. And then you have a team that basically loves to run the ball as it is, with a chance that Trey Lance is becoming the quarterback, as the season progresses. So when you look at all those different factors, I don't see how Deebo Samuel consistently becomes a true threat and a guy that eats in, week out. And particularly for a guy going 9th, 10th round right now, some of the receivers are still on the board, later on for Ruggs. There's a lot of guys on the board like a Brandon Cooks, people like those, around the same value, where I'm definitely going to try to target a guy who I think has more upside than Deebo Samuel. I know he has a lot of ability to break tackles. There's a lot of talking about, how to get the ball different ways. But overall, like I said, this offense has got a lot of different weapons that they're going to utilize, and they're going to have guys who can actually catch the ball out of the backfield a bit more. Raheem Mostert wasn't really used out of the backfield. I think you're going to see Sermon used a little bit more out of the backfield. You're going to see Mitchell probably be involved in the passing game. I think overall, you just don't see the volume in the passing game to feed a second receiver in this offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100% agree. I don't think that him as the second receiver is going to be an incredibly productive role. And again, to your point, Brandon Cooks, who you mentioned, he's about 2 receivers ahead of him. And then behind him, you've got guys like Will Fuller and Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Parker, Curtis Samuel, Jalen Waddle, Marvin Jones, Antonio Brown, even Michael Gallup, who are guys who I am a lot higher in favor of, who I think have a lot lower of floors. And honestly, in a couple of these cases, like specifically Fuller and Samuel, who I honestly potentially think have higher ceilings than Deebo does. As long as Ayuk and Kittle are healthy, or even one of them, I just don't see the opportunity for him to be a fantasy stud.
100% agree.
Yeah. All right. So finally, I'm done with the wide receiver position on my list. And it looks, you are as well. So we're out of the wide receivers. We're on to the tight ends. And I am going to start by talking about the tight end 13 currently per Fantasy Pros, Hunter Henry, who's come up a couple times today. And for me, if that's the guy you're taking, So at tight end 13, we're talking about someone who either A, you liked him more than an Evan Ingram or a Mike Gesicki, and you would rather have him as your tight end 1, or you're talking I'm putting a luxury as my backup tight end position because I don't trust who I got as my tight end 1. And for me, I would rather have in this situation his teammate Jonnu Smith. I would rather have Tanyan. I'd honestly rather have Jared Cook, who I think could be an interesting receiving option this year. To me, Hunter Henry, just with all the injuries, I don't think he's the athlete that he was. I think he's capable of being a really good red zone threat and, getting a decent volume, but I don't think he's going to be someone that stretches the field. And I don't think he's going to be someone who does anything that, you don't just expect from the tight end position. He's someone who I think is going to be a possession guy on short passes and used in the red zone. Whereas Jonnu Smith, I think they're going to really be creative with. And, guys like Tanyan, he obviously, this all goes out the window if Aaron Rodgers is gone. But I think he'll at least be as productive as Hunter Henry with Rodgers. And Cook, he could very well end up being the second or third option on the Chargers offense. Not that Hunter Henry can't, on the Patriots offense, but unless they very quickly move on from Cam, I would rather have the second or third option on the Chargers than on the Patriots any day of the week.
Yeah, so I struggle with this one a little bit more because I agree with that Jonnu Smith will be more valuable, especially in PPR purposes. And I think that, Robert Tanyan is somebody I definitely take over Hunter Henry. But I also think that when you look at Hunter Henry, basically where he's going, he's kind of taking a flyer. You talk about backup tight end, borderline maybe starter for your team. I think that what he excites me about is where I think that he has some value because he's going so late. He's not being overly pushed a lot of ways. And I think numbers-wise, I think he puts up similar numbers to Hockenstein did last year. So that's why I have Hockenstein as one of my busts. Because I look at Hunter Henry as a guy who can get you some red zone touchdowns. He's not going to have 1,000 yards, but he might get you between 700 and 900 yards, somewhere in that range. It's probably going to get you about 7 to 10 touchdowns, depending. You do have Cam Newton as a quarterback who'd love to throw to his tight ends. There's not much on the outside. So I see the upside opportunity there for Hunter Henry, but I don't disagree that it's not a guarantee he's going to be productive, especially over certain guys like you're saying, Jonnu Smith or Robert Tanyan, who I think definitely have more value. But I think he's somebody maybe I would take a flyer on later on. I don't think his ADP isn't ridiculous in my opinion, but I do understand, some of the questions, especially the health overall. What will he really bring to the table?
Yeah, 100%. He's someone, and I'm probably this way on most of these last couple, but who I'm being a little bit more nitpicky on in that, I think there's a player or two behind them that I'd rather have, but overall, they're not in that crazy of a spot. So we'll move on to your Trevor Lawrence take over there with you're doubling up on your Jaguars rookies.
Well, this goes back to kind of my point about what, the offense and what kind of the coaches you have in place. Darren Bevel coached, Russell Wilson his rookie year, and they were predominantly a run-oriented team. Urban Meyer, gets a lot of glitz and talk about how he runs a spread offense, but he likes to run the ball predominantly. And Kurt Schottenheimer is your offensive passing coach who traditionally got ran out of New York Jets because he didn't throw the ball enough. So it's really interesting to see kind of their mix of coaching staff that they have a bunch of guys who love to run the ball for 3 yards and a pound of dust afterwards, or cloud of dust, I should say. And I think that when you look at Trevor Lawrence's hype, I think his numbers aren't too bad where he's going ADP wise, but there's a lot of hype on Trevor Lawrence. He's going to put out Justin Herbert numbers, Andrew Luck numbers. I don't necessarily think he's going to have this dramatic start off the beginning of the season. I also question some of the talk about his legs. You look in college, it took a while for Trevor Lawrence to actually want to run the ball consistently. He hasn't been highly effective running the ball in college, and I don't see why it changes necessarily in the pros. This guy isn't, a dual threat where he's running for 1,000 yards while he was in college. He ran for a couple hundred yards, I think, last year, and the year before, I think he only had 300 yards. I think it was on 70 attempts. So when you look overall at a guy who really isn't necessarily a guy who's trying to look to run, you don't have the floor that you kind of expect to have in a lot of senses. And I don't think you can guarantee the upside that you see in Justin Herbert or Andrew Luck was, because I think you look at the guys around and the coaching staff around, it doesn't really add up to me. So maybe I'm surprised by what he was able to do, but I think the hype is kind of where I'm kind of, poo-pooing a little bit on Trevor Lawrence, because I feel like people are really trying to make this guy like because he's a generational talent, he's going to put up these generational numbers right off the bat. I don't necessarily see that happening.
Right. And I mean, you see guys like, so he's currently going as the QB 14. So you're expecting him to be a high end QB 2 to a borderline QB 1, which for a rookie is just a lot to ask in general. But you're talking about beating out guys like Matt Ryan, who's in an offense with a lot of good weapons and could be really good, especially they don't have like a dynamic running back. So the passing volume could be there. Justin Fields, who has a much safer, I think, floor once he gets on the field because of the running ability. And then, a couple of these other guys, Baker, Kirk, etc. Kirk has been a great quarterback to have as your QB2 for a long time now. There is a little bit of the upside, I will say. That's what kept him off of my list, just because their defense is so putrid. They just haven't done enough to touch it. That I could see him needing to throw a lot. I could see the choice being taken away from his coaching staff. But if his coaching staff gets what they want, you're right. I think there's a couple safer options below him.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall there's some guys that I would take a shot on, and some other guys who I think are in better situations. I wouldn't be surprised if Zach Wilson puts up better fantasy numbers than Trevor Lawrence does this year.
Right. He's in a much more, at this point, I hate to come to this assumption before they've played a game, but I think it's a much more stable coaching situation, or in general organizational situation. I think Wilson's got great weapons. I think, to your point, he's a little bit more willing to run when things break down. So I could absolutely see it. He's someone who, if we did a top 10 undervalued, I think he would be near the top of that list, because he is getting absolutely no love. All right, moving on to all right, so I had done Justin Herbert. I was a little bit, we already pretty much had this conversation, but I was a little bit more nitpicky about him. I just really, I don't think he should be going ahead of Rodgers and Brady. But past that, I think he's that next up guy. So we'll just move straight on to my number 9 guy, who's Jalen Hurts. He's another guy who I'm not I don't think it's that outrageous where he's going, but to me, he profiles to me just because of his passing ability that I don't trust very much. I would rather have a couple of the guys going below him in Ryan Tannehill, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, even potentially Matt Ryan, who we discussed with Lawrence. I would potentially have one of those guys instead of Hurts, who I think Hurts' floor is safe as long as he's the starter. And with Joe Flacco as the backup, I'm not that concerned that he loses the starting job. But I don't think that there's the upside that some are taking with him, because I just don't think he'll ever ignite as a passer. I think he's someone who you're banking on getting a rushing touchdown for your fantasy day to be any more than a solid 15 points.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I like Jalen Hurts' legs. I think he has a floor because of the legs. But I do have some legitimate questions about his overall production. Number one, change in coaching staff. I think that you have a team, basically I have no idea what we're actually going to get for Sirianni right now. And I think that we looked at Jacoby Brissett with a pretty good mobile threat for the Colts, but he wasn't really utilizing the running game at all when he became the quarterback starter for them. So I kind of wonder if Jalen Hurts is kind of coached to stay in the pocket more often. And I also think you look at the weapons. While I like Devontae Smith, he's a rookie. You have Jalen Reagor, second year. So you have a lot of guys who are younger receivers, and it takes usually receivers a little bit to consistently get open and consistently be effective. So Jalen Hurts has got a lot of things stacked against him, I think, to be productive in the passing game. The legs, like I said, give him an upside, I think. But I also think that you have some questions definitely when it comes to overall production week in, week out, particularly in the passing game.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that I think his legs will serve him well enough that he'll be a high-end QB2, and he may even make it up to his QB10. But if he does, it's going to be close. He's going to be narrowly beating out someone like the Tannehills and Staffords that are going below him. Whereas I don't know. I find it a little more likely that someone like Stafford or Tannehill, blows up as a passer than it is that Hurts becomes slightly above average passer, which is what it would take essentially for him to be someone who I would want as my consistent QB1. All right, so moving on to Logan Thomas. Speaking of the quarterback position, we've got a former quarterback moved tight end, Logan Thomas.
Yeah, Logan Thomas's ADP is a little high for me. I think that he's going to be a decent tight end option. We talked about different tight ends, guys that we like or don't like. But Robert Tonyan, for example, is a good example of a guy who I think is definitely better than Logan Thomas. And Logan Thomas is going to be 30 years old. He's not necessarily going to have still on his upside. I think he had his best year kind of last year in a lot of ways. Washington added more talent at the receiving position as well, which I think is also going to be impactful. Now, I think the red zone will have some usage because, we know Fitzpatrick likes to throw the ball up. But I also think that Fitzpatrick tends to like throw the ball to his receivers more often than his tight ends. We saw Gesicki kind of struggle with his consistency as a tight end tight end option. And then when you look at Logan Thomas, I also think that he doesn't do anything particularly that jumps off the TV for you, where you're just like, this guy's so fast or runs great routes. He's a bigger, taller guy. He's about 6'5". But they talked about, some guys who can be stuck by a linebacker. We talked about, Hawkinston. This guy's not going to necessarily blow by people. He's not a size, speed, ridiculous guy where you're just like, you can't match up with him. I think he benefited a lot from Alex Smith being quarterback for a good portion of the year last year, where we know Alex Smith traditionally throws the tight end or the running back, and that's pretty much what he's going to go to. So with Fitzpatrick, I think you have a little bit of a change in the guard. A team that's going to have more receiving options on the outside, be more aggressive down the field. I don't see Logan Thomas fits with all those things.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That he definitely benefited a little bit from having Alex Smith, and you mentioned Gesicki. He's going below Logan Thomas, and I think depending on where you stand on Tua, he's someone who I feel like at least has more upside. And at this tight end position, like we're already in this little bunch at the bottom right here, I feel like you want to chase upside. So you want to chase someone like Tonyan, who has the potential to get a lot of touchdowns, a lot of targets, because the receivers outside of Devontae Adams aren't that great, or someone like Gesicki who could just emerge as a great option for Tua. We don't know who Tua is going to fall in love with as his receivers to this point. I'd have to agree with you. I think Logan Thomas is in for a bit of a decline at this tight end position, and the back end. You're kind of shooting a dart at this point. Like it's hard to say what's going to happen with these guys at the end. But yeah, Logan Thomas wouldn't be my first pick if I was looking for my tight end one. So moving on to my last guy, I kept this a little bit lighthearted just because I saw him at the bottom of the positional ADP. Tim Tebow is currently the tight end 32, the tight end 3. So if for some reason you were in a deep enough league that you would first be rostering Tim Tebow or rostering 3 tight ends, do me a favor, don't roster Tim Tebow. There is no good reason for this to be the case at all. Like I cannot even begin to fathom why this is a thing. I'm not convinced that Tebow makes the roster, and if he does, we are talking about a quarterback who, he ran a 4.8 in the draft when he was training specifically for the 40. And we are a decade later. You cannot tell me that he runs any more than a 4.9. He's undersized for the position. He's never played the position. He's in his 30s. He's been playing a different sport for like 6-7 years at this point. I wish Tebow all of the best, but if you put him anywhere near your fantasy team, you're an absolute nut job.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Number one, I don't wish him all of the best. I think that it's a farce that he's even getting an opportunity to play the tight end position. I'd rather see Kelvin Benjamin try to play a tight end than watching Tim Tebow out there trying to play tight end. And I also look at Tim Tebow. A lot of people are trying to make the comparisons to Taysom Hill. As you brought up that F40 speed, Taysom Hill ran a 4.49. Taysom Hill is an athlete. He can do multiple things. So even Tebow was utilized in some kind of different role where he's the goal line back or some things that they kind of make some kind of stupid play for him to kind of utilize him. He's not somebody you want on your fantasy team. Maybe he has a week where he has like a touchdown because he ran one in. Maybe he does something that, gets you some kind of numbers Taysom Hill got you like 3 or 4 years ago. But the usage and all the gadget players they already have in place, I just see where does he really fall in line. I think that Tim Tebow is basically there just so they have somebody to kind of talk about, make Urban Meyer look better than he really is, because I think Urban Meyer's got a hell of a record if you look at it. But I think that when Tim Tebow comes, is basically that guy that's supposed to be like, anybody can do it, the hardworking guy, the good Christian dude that everybody wants to kind of look up to. That's awesome, except for I think the tight end position and playing football is not going to work out. That's also why George Kittle didn't invite him to the tight end camp.
Yep, these are all fantastic points. Yeah, no debate from me. There's definitely other tight ends that should have gotten a shot. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to fathom him being in the league, and the fact that he was being picked at tight end 32. Once again, that's so irrelevant for fantasy that I'm surprised the stat even exists.
But you and I talked about Harris from the Rams. Like, I think we both would agree that he's a better of a guy to try to take a shot on there if you have a deep position where you're a tight end loaded league you're playing in than it's Tim Tebow.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure that he's the tight end 3 on the Jaguars, let alone a tight end 3 in fantasy. He's being picked 32nd among tight ends, and there's probably 50 or 60 that you should be getting before him. So I don't know. That we don't need to talk about a tight end that's not going to play. Instead, we can talk about one that is to end the show. Irv Smith Jr., not new, he's been around for a little bit, but now fully the starting tight end for the Minnesota Vikings. Why is he being overvalued?
Yeah, so this one's hard for me because it reached so close to my heart. Now, first of all, Irv Smith Sr. went to my high school, so I always kind of looked out for Irv Smith Jr. because I was hopeful that he'd be productive. I think he's got a hell of a talent. I think that he should be a guy that you'd want to target in fantasy. However, he plays for the Minnesota Vikings, and the Vikings don't seem to want to utilize tight end position. We kind of see, even you can buy him and Kyle Rudolph's numbers last year, Irv Smith Jr. still is not some guy you wanted to target. We talk about Adam Thielen having a hard time making sure that he eats. I don't know how you're going to try to make sure that Irv Smith Jr. is going to be involved. There's already talk about using Tyler Conklin a lot of times from Zimmer, kind of insinuated that Conklin's also going to be out there a lot, kind of in the Kyle Rudolph role. So Irv Smith Jr.'s potential is kind of limited in a lot of ways because he's going to be on a lot of 2 tight end sets. He's already going to be the 3rd or 4th option in the passing game because Dalvin Cook's going to be involved, Adam Thielen's going to be involved, Jefferson's going to be involved. And then we look at overall the volume of that team doesn't throw the ball a lot. They're going to run the ball more than they're going to throw. So while I wish Irv Smith Jr. nothing but production and hopeful that he will be a star that he can be, because I think he's got a lot of talent. I think he's got a good runner. I think he's a good blocker. He's just on the wrong team, on the wrong situation right now. So the jump out where I think people are kind of hyping them because Rudolph's gone, I don't necessarily see that jump. I wish I did, but I don't see it.
Yeah, and just because of his size, he's not the typical tight end size. And what that means to me is that someone like Conklin will potentially be ahead of him in line for red zone targets, which if you're a tight end who's outside of the 5, 6, maybe 7 max that are getting wide receiver level targets, for pretty much everyone else the position, you are fantasy relevant because you score touchdowns. And with someone like Thielen, who we saw get a bunch of touchdowns last year, with Justin Jefferson on the team, with Dalvin Cook being an elite running back, and then with Conklin, I'm not going to guarantee that Irv Smith Jr. gets a ton of touchdowns, and that's where we would be getting value out of him. I think he is, to your point, a great player. He's a really good matchup against linebackers with his speed, good route runner, someone who I think there are situations and offenses where he could break out, but I don't know that this one is that.
Yeah.
So that's our show tonight. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to follow at Belly Up Fantasy Live on Twitter if you haven't already. And then you can follow at L'Heureux Adam right down below me right here if you're watching the video stream at LHEUREUX Adam. If you are listening in. Chris, are you guys doing your show with Dan this week?
No, so this week the MD's Fantasy Show is going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus while Dan's in Hawaii, living it up, living on the beach, enjoying his vacation he definitely deserves. So we'll be back in 2 weeks, returning to our team profiles to continue to break down the rest of the teams that we have on our list. But I think that this week, he should enjoy his vacation, and so should MD Nation.
Absolutely, yes. Dan, once again, if you're listening, enjoy your vacation and also stop listening. All right, everyone, we will be back on this show in 2 weeks, either discussing, I believe, undervalued or best ball. I'm not sure how the schedule lines up. We'll figure that out, and we'll be back to you in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching.